It's time for your next favorite episode of the Integratedness Podcast with Jason and Jolene.
Welcome back to your next favorite episode? No. Welcome to your next favorite episode of the Integratedness Podcast with Jason and Jolene. My brain was incorporating the beginning and the end together.
I think it's because you're not really genuine. I think you're just trying to persuade people into thinking it's their favorite episode, and you haven't really given them a chance to choose for themselves, Jason.
Do I have to give them a chance to choose for themselves? People don't make choices very well, Jolene, unless you point them in the right direction.
Right, okay, because people suck.
They suck. Look what they did in the States. Like, come on.
Oh, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, graveyard shift, whatever time this episode brings you. Jason and I are going to talk about cynicism today.
We are. And did you get new glasses?
I did.
They're really
like
good. I like those
Thank
a lot.
You.
They're very cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, I like them.
They're
They match like your hair and the
They
stuff.
do.
Yeah.
They're a little bit more, like they kind of blend more into my face. So sometimes I feel a little bit more naked than like my darker lenses.
Gotcha. No, they're good. I like them.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so cynicism here. Here we go. And if you couldn't tell by the intro there. Jason was giving a really good example of why this topic came up, which I'll let him allude to. But we're just going to start with Jolene's classic definition Google search of what is cynicism. So cynicism is an attitude characterized by a general distrust of the motives of others. A cynic may have a general lack of faith or hope in people motivated by ambition, desire, greed, gratification, materialism, goals, and opinions that a cynic perceives as vain, unobtainable, or ultimately meaningless.
It pretty much sums it up, and it sums me up, actually, to a T. And the reason it came up is my counselor actually hit me with what she calls an orange flag. Like there's kind of a yellow flag in therapy, an orange flag, and a red flag. And a red flag is like you probably are at risk of causing harm to yourself or others.
I like the white and black checkered flags.
They're pretty cool too. They're pretty cool
just
too.
Go.
Just go for it. But she hit me with an orange one, and it's something I could kind of see coming, and I do. Obviously, I trust her judgment and stuff like that. But basically, she's saying because of my cynical nature, I have been letting some people go from my life because we've simply outgrown each other. Because I've changed a lot, and they haven't. There's been some resentment on their part and a wanting of me to kind of just conform to the person I was before, and that's just not healthy. It's not healthy for me. It's not healthy for them. So I've been letting people go, but I haven't really been replacing those people with new people who are like-minded. And her argument is that if you do not have a support network in your life, it can lead you to a downward slope in terms of behavior. And when you really crash and burn, there's no one around to pick you up or help you.
I feel like that's your ultimate goal. Nobody around.
I like my time in the woods by myself.
Okay. I get it.
So, which I understand that. So it's been something I've kind of been meditating on. But at the same time, as we've discussed many times on this show, I am a loner. I'm an introvert. My marriage, I've got a great connection with my wife. The people I work with are my friends also, because that's the kind of work that we do.
Yeah.
And I've got probably about a half dozen people that I see on a semi-regular basis and connect with. Plus, I've got like my boot camp classes or my yoga classes, which are also social outings for me.
I'm just going to point out that the introvert in this duo here has a 10 times better social life than the extrovert. Fuck, Jason.
Right?
Man.
So I also kind of call a bit of bullshit to the assessment. No offense to Alicia or anything like that.
No. I think it warrants really good exploration and discussion, because I do think that some people who are so committed to this idea that nobody's fitting into their mold will remain in their cynic kind of mindset in order to facilitate the negative cognition that everybody sucks, or I've moved past everyone and this and that. So it almost reinforces that negative belief all the time.
Yeah.
Or the new belief, which could be a positive one, that becomes detrimental to us. I get where she's going there, and I think that applies to a lot of people, because I can think of a handful of clients I would have had that conversation with. In this one, I'm going to just if I can just interject for a sec there, Jay, when you talked about, you specifically said, and I'm leaving people behind. No, I'm letting people go. You said I'm letting people go. And I envision this as a bit of a highway for you. And I was like, you're not letting them go. They didn't merge off of this highway and go in a different direction. They stayed. you moved on.
Yeah.
So even the statement of I'm letting them go is different than I've moved beyond.
Yeah,
I know you
that's a
heard
good
you
one.
say you outgrew it. So I envisioned you literally merging off of this highway to connect with a different directive highway, right?
yeah.
The alignment highway, I call it, right? In that, you won't always get to the next destination right away. There is this solo time before you hit the next city or something. That's where you are. And during that solo time, you're actually going through your car to be like, what do I already have that I can re-inventory or reuse? You can revamp. This is a goal this year for you, is like for you and Jess to reignite things for yourselves in new ways now that Griffin's older and you've got more time and space. She has done some work. You've done some work. You guys are meeting in the middle again, right?
Yeah. Well, for the most part.
Yeah, right? So looking at that and again, like the friends and the people you already have, right? We don't want to prematurely add people to our lives until we're closer to the destinations we're going, because there's a lot of time and energy in this travel part for us.
Well, for
And
sure
the
there
minute
is.
we start in reciprocal relationships and you're looking for quality aligned relationships, you're going to have to start taking away from a little bit of the journey that you're on right now.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. And, there's other people that I've kind of crossed paths with that I think, they could be pretty good friends, maybe, down the road. But you have to see it. Like you say, it takes time and it takes effort and there's stuff. There's life and stuff.
I think cynicism protects us in some of these areas where you go, I'm going to be really selective now.
Yeah.
If I wasn't a cynic here, then I would probably just be embracing anyone who skipped along my path or, that really enjoyed the same yoga class as me. Like, oh, we're so aligned, because sometimes that happens.
Well, then it does. And especially when we're younger, when you're just, like say your kid's age and you're making new friends, you have something in common.
God.
So boom, that person's like your new best friend
Instant
for life.
codependency. That is just a natural, like, besties, right? And I always talk about besties as being like the worst form of codependent relationship as we become adults, right?
Sure can be.
Yeah, for sure.
Like,
So with that, have a look at where cynicism serves you and then where it is a detriment. Where does it serve you in this realm?
I am not easily duped by people or situations. I don't just jump onto whatever trend is cool or talk about something just because everyone else on the planet's talking about it. I don't allow myself to get worked up about what's going down south of the 49th parallel because if you paid attention, you could see it coming. And now they got to deal with it. It's not my problem. And I can't do anything about it anyways. So what's the point in getting all worked up? But I do, like, say, here's a prime example. At boot camp, there's a group of people there that are always tanned, always sculpted. Their phones are never out of their hands. They're there to talk to each other. And at the end of every class, they do selfies and pose in front of the mirror and do bicep curls and all this stuff.
Doing that.
And I'm just like, and I almost laughed out loud one time because they're all in front of the mirror doing that and taking their picture. And I was just, I had to rush out of the room because I was going to start laughing because what a bunch of fucking fake pussies. You know what I mean? And then as soon as it got cold, they stopped showing up. But am I surprised by this? No, because I see that everywhere. Maybe where my cynicism does become a detriment is that I don't believe those people will change.
There.
I think they're fucked for life. You know what I mean?
So your core belief that keeps that cynicism locked in a pretty significant place, where does that root from? Who in your life did you hope would change that didn't?
Oh, Jesus. I would say like the woman who raised me.
I was going
to
to
say. A big one like that. And just like certain friends that I have had to move on from because they are the exact same they are at 52 that they were at 12.
So that is going to be, this is something, if you were in my office, and I'm sure you and Alicia will get there after you've had these moments here now. But that would be the negative cognition I'd work on, right? Why am I so committed to the belief and the facts and the evidence, collecting that people can't change when I'm so open and accepting of my own change journey, showing that people can? So I would peel apart, what is it about the ones that didn't change and who highlights that path along your way? You know who they are. And what are the key elements of what suggests there is potential for change and movement of change? And how do I find more people like that?
Yeah. Oh, for sure, right? Because there are people out there, obviously, right?
Yeah.
And that's something that she even said to me. Is like, well, you were able to, because I was very much like that, and I've sort of moved on. So if you can't other people? And I said, well, yeah, I just haven't seen evidence of that.
Because it's a timing thing.
Right.
Everyone has it at a different time in their life, and we don't know when that is. So I had a young gal in my office who had a bestie, and they had this falling out, and Now her bestie is overseas traveling. They're like in their like early 20s, late teens, I think, right? So she's all, traveling and this and that. They are friends on social media, but they did have this bestie falling out. And we really talked about how that needed to happen, because if this friend really did need to go and explore the world and get away from, the unhappiness of her home life and things like that, if she had a codependent bestie at home, she would have never fully let herself spread her wings and make connections over there. They almost had to push each other apart. And then the friend left home really needed to start working on, she had already personally developed quite a bit on her own. So this, she had already done a lot of that this friend needed to do, but probably had to do it outside of her home and the codependent relationship she had here. So there was this really beautiful conversation of both of them are changing, but they couldn't change together because their connection would have prevented that from happening. And I always tell people that, whether it's in romantic relationships, work projects or whatever, you can just really commit to your own personal journey. And if you end up meeting up with that other person later down the road, then you both get a better version of yourselves, but you have to be open to not meeting up with them again or meeting up with them again and having an enhanced relationship.
Yeah, you got to be either, you got to look at it that no matter what happens, you're both okay.
Yeah, you have to be willing to say goodbye to it.
Yeah,
you have to be willing to say goodbye.
Hard, and people generally don't want to.
Yeah.
Right? They don't want to let go. They don't want to change their connections or anything like that.
It honestly reminds me of, an old high school friend of mine, and he left not the brightest bulb in the pack. He left his boat tied to the buoy too closely. It was too closely tied, and there was a huge storm, and it sank.
Of course it would.
It sank. The boat sank.
Of course it would sink.
When we hold on too tight to something.
I like that.
It really makes me, and they had to get divers, and like this old boat was like hilarious too. So anyways, it really reminds me of that analogy right there. Yeah.
That's a good one.
Okay. So cynicism, what are the areas of our lives where we may find ourselves being more of a cynic, or what are topics and areas, like who are primary people and experiences in your life where you've found yourself being more cynical?
Well, I would say, look at my whole journalism experience as a crime reporter for 10 years. Everyone in the newsroom's cynical.
Yeah.
Because of the work that we do.
Yeah.
And didn't just do that. Okay, yeah. And what I saw in those 10 years really affects. And I think the thing that for me that sticks is not just seeing the tit bodies and the ruined lives and all this kind of stuff. It's that my editor would always say, people are listening. They are paying attention, but you can't see that. There's no one coming up and saying, thanks for writing that story about the accident on the highway because it's convinced me to drive slower. So you're putting all this out there and you're not seeing any return on it in a sense. And that just sort of leads to your cynicism, because you can ask yourself, well, why am I doing this? It's pointless. No one's learning. No one's changing. Every Labor Day weekend, someone gets killed at Hoffman's Bluff in an accident, but I've written stories for the last 8 years about people getting killed. Isn't anybody learning anything? And that's where that can really come from. And I think that's where I was a very naive human being. And then I did that job for 10 years, and it was like a complete flip. I know Jordan Peterson has a really good thing where cynicism's better than naivety, but it can't outweigh that childhood hope. So it's learning how to, and that's something that I agreed with Alicia that I need to find, is that sort of that hope, get that hope back.
Yeah. And I would agree with that. I have less opportunities or need to be cynical in my life because as a social worker, one of our core beliefs and values that we essentially have to carry professionally and personally is the belief that everybody has the intrinsic ability to change. And, again, if we're going to be working in forensics with sex offenders and various different individuals and life experiences and all of these things, we truly have to believe that people are capable of change if we are going to be continually showing up at our jobs and doing what we're going to do, right? And change, it can come in whatever potential way and anywhere along the spectrum from minimal change to maximum change kind of thing. But essentially, that's a core belief. I also get to see the inner world of what's happening. So many people only get to see the outside impact, the actions, but they don't understand what's underneath it. And I think when we can see what's underneath it, we understand that behavior so much differently. So I feel like I have a bit of an advantage to some insider notes there and blueprints that stop me from being as cynical. And I do see patterns where if you have continual evidence, I call it evidence because that's what we do. We open a file in our life that says people are unreliable or people don't change. And then every experience we have that reinforces that gets filed into this thing, right? And that's really what EMDR tidies up, is that file.
Yeah.
So I look at it as evidence. How many pieces of evidence have you collected over the years? And how we collect that evidence also depends on what we're looking for.
Oh, for sure.
That's the piece that I think Alicia's highlighting for you too, is, I will tell people, if you go out and look at the street and count how many green cars there are, and they're like, oh, there was whatever. And then you're like, okay, well, how many white ones were there? Well, I don't know. I wasn't looking for white ones, right?
You're looking for the green car.
Perfect example of it. Anything that we're looking for, we can find, right? So it's about, okay, am I looking for people I can't trust, or who am I looking for that's like me, that's suggesting that they're making some changes in their life that are riding in a bit of the same place that I am? And that's really the process you've been on for how long,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And just allowing yourself to choose those things, right? Choose those places. I think that we are cynical about political agendas. We are cynical about anybody in powers of authority. I think we naturally get more cynical about bosses.
I think we're getting very cynical about like big pharma, pharmaceuticals,
Yep.
right?
Oh,
Things
I
like
think we
that.
have been for a long time. Yeah. I'm trying to think what else, and actually I think that we have grown into such an individualistic culture that anyone who attempts to take a more collective approach to helping thy neighbor, or being kind, or paying it forward, or just leading with a compliment or positivity, we're like, what do you want?
I think that's very true. Actually, it's gotten a lot worse.
It is not common. People are often like, given the goods before they ask for the damage, and I think that's created through whatever it be, right? I think individualistic culture. Right? We've really forced people to take care of themselves. They're on their own. The only way to the top is through their own devices, and we don't help each other get higher, right?
Well, and the way social media and the internet's been designed too, with that algorithm, is everything is catered towards.
Guys, I just touched the computer and it
made
made a noise.
noise.
I'm like, oh God, I'm sorry.
It's been doing that a lot lately.
Oh,
Maybe it's
okay,
time for
sorry.
a tune-up. But because of the algorithm, everything that you want to believe in is fed to you based on your, so people.
Fake news.
Well, it is, yeah, right.
Yeah.
It's fake news, but everything's become more individualistic, which doesn't help. Because if you're a cynical person like me, guess what you're going to see? Yeah. Just when you go online, right? Like, yeah.
Okay, so Jason, I'm going to ask you,
Yeah.
when you get cynical, what happens in your body?
Like, what do you mean?
So who is a person you're most cynical about in your personal life? You don't have to say it out loud. I want you to really think about it. I want you to think about someone who you question their agenda. Okay. And I am going to say that they've just called you up or shown up at your front door with a kind gesture for you.
They never have.
But they're going to.
Okay, so they're going
Okay,
to. Okay,
so they're just showing up with something, and they're like,
Gotcha.
"Hey, Jason,
Okay.
I got this,"
Yeah.
and I'm like really excited to share it with you, and I think you should be a part of it.
Ugh.
That.
Yeah.
Okay, you get rigid. You stood up like fucking 4 inches
Right.
taller. Like, honestly, guys, Jason just grew like 4 inches here. Yeah, you got taller.
Oh,
You
yeah?
became bigger. You became more rigid in your presence.
Well, no, suddenly it's just like, oh, fuck, here we go.
You're not open. Your heart
not
closed.
open. Yeah.
Your heart closed. Your energy center closed. There
Yeah.
is a giant wall there. I really want you to be aware of that. This is a visceral response to that belief system.
Okay.
That is your EMDR target right there.
Okay.
How do I make space? And this now comes from a place of, do I trust myself that I can make good decisions about who I'm including in my life? That's one of your core beliefs you got to conquer, because now any person that doesn't have good intentions isn't going to viscerally do that to you in your body, because you're going to trust that once they show you that, you can walk away.
Yeah.
But if you lead with that, you will block every potential positive interaction you could have. So the idea, and I do this with people in the dating game, and I did it with myself too, just because I've been ruined by so many people, or like taken advantage of, or my love wasn't like treated in the good ways, and that was just as much my fault, right? I still stayed committed to leading with an open heart, because if I led into the right situation with a closed heart, I could really lose that opportunity. So what I encourage people to do is lead with an open heart, and I consider the heart space open, your energy space open, and know that if somebody chooses to mistreat that, with the wrong intentions, the wrong behaviors, whatever that be. I always just say the wrong intentions, right? If I'm gifting somebody my open heart and trust and welcoming, and they choose to treat it poorly or take advantage of it, I know I can close that door. It's like, I will let you into my store, but if you steal from me, you can't come back in. But I'm gonna let every customer come into my store because they could be a potential buyer.
Yeah.
Right? So those are the pieces that I would say could help twist a bit of the cynicism that's there as a response rather than a intuitive mechanism.
Gotcha.
Right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So I really want you guys to think of this. Who are the people in your life that have, given you that yucky feeling? They've given you the feeling of like, I don't know, I don't really trust that. You've shown me before, you've constantly pawned your work off on me or this or that, whatever that be. And then consider yourself like, how can I approach this with a more open sense of
You're
acceptance?
going to give someone a chance before you just tell them to F off, basically.
There's many people that we don't give a chance to.
Yeah.
But I would pay attention to that response and be like, why am I getting this response with someone I just met?
Yeah.
And really sit with that and allow yourself to try a different approach until they show otherwise.
Yeah.
And this is where like we start building trust in relationships, and it's mostly the trust in the relationship with ourselves to choose wisely. We can trust that we will do the right thing if a shitty person presents.
Yeah.
And the longer we held on to shitty relationships and connections, the lower our confidence was in that. Right?
Yeah, for sure.
So that's what you're building back. I'm cutting people out. And then now I know if somebody like that comes into my life, I'm not letting it go on for 15 years. Like I will let that move on and it's not stuck with me for 15 years.
Yeah. Yeah. Because people will, I don't know, we've both seen it, will sit in relationships or positions way longer than they should have because they just don't know how to get out, or they just they feel like they're trapped, or they just, I'm just going to give another chance.
And there's some scenarios that we will, the job that's not aligned with us, but we have to do for the paycheck for a couple years, or, the person, maybe the roommate that we're with for the semester because whatever. Right. Yeah. So recognizing it's like this commitment to self around some of those things. Yeah.
Interesting stuff.
Where do you think, if we could zoom way earlier into life, in childhood, like what was the earliest you started becoming cynical?
Well, I've been cynical my whole life. Mm-hmm. Like I really have. And I think it's partly, you could track it back to the primal wound of being put up for adoption.
Yeah.
That just, because I've always had that dark side to my personality, and cynical nature. I think because of that, the fear of abandonment that comes along with that, that's just naturally in your DNA at that point. Mm-hmm. Wanting to be liked and accepted, I would put myself in situations where I probably shouldn't have, just for wanting to be liked and accepted and feel like I belong.
Yeah.
And then that's where I think some long-term friendships came from that probably shouldn't have been there for as long as they have been. And then same with going into romantic relationships that were just probably the wrong choice from the get-go, and knowing it, but because you so want that love and attention and affection, you stuck with it longer than you should have. So that just, each one compounds and builds on that feeling of cynicism, right?
Yeah. And again, when we look at that larger life course path, like every decision we make is the right decision at that time, even if it doesn't have a positive outcome in our opinion, right?
Because you learn in the end from it always, right? And I think that's the big thing, is eventually I started figuring it out and learning. So
they all led you to the places you're at. Like I am a big believer in that, because if that didn't happen with one person there, it was going to happen with someone else somewhere else, because it was about accomplishing the task of learning those things in order to get to where you are. Yeah. So I want everyone to think about that visceral response of their cynicism. What happens when you are, in disbelief or not really believing the intentions of another? Are you overly trusting of the intentions of others and have been burned? Are you on the opposite end? Like Jason, do you feel like you're in between somewhere? Where does cynicism fit into your life? And maybe for many of you, you've never truly thought about it this way, right? It's funny because I rarely use the word cynicism. Even looking at it, it just looks so foreign to me, because I talk more about the concepts and dynamics than I do about that word. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting. And I guess I'm going to ask you right now, Jason, is cynicism from an initial response.
Okay.
Is this a protective mechanism or is this a detrimental mechanism? Do you have a positive or negative connotation to cynicism?
Well, I have a positive connotation to it. Because I think it's preferable to naivety.
Yeah.
Right? Because it can protect you. And it has, I know in many ways it has helped me get through some hard times as well. But it's like anything, it shouldn't be the norm.
That's really funny because as a word, it's very negatively loaded for me.
Yeah, and some people it is. I think a lot of people it is, right? But I kind of, I don't know. I think even like if I think of the characters that I've like enjoyed following in fictional stories, they're cynical, Dirty Harry. Okay. Indiana Jones. Although he does things for the right reasons and for hope, he's just got a cynical nature to him, right? Batman. It's kind of an obvious one. Whereas I looked at characters, say like a Superman, that's all about that beacon of hope and light. I just can't even enjoy the stories because I'm like, it's bullshit, right? So, yeah. But again, that's like, you could take that back to when I was like 5. I liked Han Solo more than Luke Skywalker, right?
Yeah. Interesting. I want the rest of you to reflect on that. Which characters you were most likely drawn to and what attributes they typically leaned towards, right? And is cynicism a positive or negatively loaded word for you and concept? Yeah, it's definitely negative for me. And I think that goes to my intrinsic like belief that like I do believe people are capable of change. I actually acknowledge all the time it may or may not be in this lifetime. Right? And that's the thing. And, you know, it's just like blaming somebody for not hitting puberty at the same time as you. Like that, we don't have control over some of those things. You know?
No, and I think that's part of the learning curve if you are cynical. I mean, because I think there's a little, like I said, a little bit, shouldn't be totally not cynical, but like understand that you do you and let them do them.
Yeah, and I think it's also a patience thing too, right? Like I genuinely get excited for people to reach that turning point for themselves because I'm like, man, I remember when I was unable to, like, I couldn't unsee what I saw finally, right? And I remember how life-changing moments became after that for me in terms of how I led into the world. Some people call it waking up, whatever it be. It's a accumulation of a bunch of things. And I will go through people's timelines with them in my office and I'm like, essentially what you're going through right now, you had 3 previous opportunities to do that. And they're like, yeah, like, why didn't I do that at 22 when this happened? And I said, because you were getting fed nudges. But if you had done it then, you know, the next 20 years of codependent relationships you had with the 2 people who are now gone from your life, you wouldn't have had what you had with them. And it's really bizarre to look at it.
Oh, it is.
Right? And she said, yeah, like I might not have married that person. I might not have had these times with this person because I would have been more healed and I wouldn't have participated that way in the relationships, right? Which then changes the kids in your life and all of the things.
Think of all the things that would be different.
We often have multiple opportunities in our life to make that pivotal shift, but we do it in, 15-degree terms, right?
Yeah. And then you kind of do it, I think, when you ultimately are supposed to do it, right? And you got to believe that. Maybe some people say you're making up a story, but I think that that just from my life experience, everything happens when it's supposed to happen for a reason.
I get to see that for so many people, and it makes sense that when it happens, there are other things in place in their life that facilitate the most beneficial cruising through that stage, right? So rather than swimming across the ocean or going on a raft, you're going on a fucking ship.
Yep.
And many times it is when that materialistic or environmental stability in our life is maintained.
Yeah.
And I do think that generationally we've got the support now from, say, like our eras now, Jason, to support people to do this younger.
Yes, I think so too. Yeah, like I know my kid's way more alert and aware than I was. Right?
Oh my God, I have 21-year-olds going through the same thing a 65-year-old is doing. Yeah. Because now both are given that specific tool.
Yeah.
Right?
Which is great.
Yeah. So I also think that's like if we were to zoom out, that's what we're looking at. And how in 20 years that might change cynicism because these generations have witnessed it. Mm-hmm. They witnessed their parents change their lives. Like I talk with so many young adults who reflect on their parents' divorces and how different their mom is or, this or that, all of these pieces, right? They're seeing the change that you never saw in your mom, right? Yeah.
Which is interesting.
Yeah, so maybe cynicism is going to evolve and there will be less prevalence of it because
Maybe.
we will have more evidence of people being more genuine.
But there'll still be the Trumps, Jolene.
Oh my God, we're
There
not.
will still
we're
be the
not doing it.
Trumps.
We're not going there, guys. We're not going there.
And on that cynical note, we shall bring to a close this favorite episode of the Into Greatness podcast with Jason and Jolene. Till next week, I'm Jason.
And I'm Jolene.
Talk to you soon.